What is up, guys? We're back with more picks and predictions this weekend. We finally have a good UFC card. We got Merab Dvalishvili versus Sean O'Malley, the rematch at UFC 316. This is being held in New Jersey. I'm excited to break down every single matchup on this card. So without further ado, let's hop into the picks and predictions for UFC 316. Kicking off the card in the early prelims, we got MarQuel Mederos versus Choinski. I'm going to have to go with MarQuel Mederos to beat Choinski this weekend. I think that Choinski in this matchup really has one path to victory, and that's to get this fight to the ground against Mederos. And while Mederos did struggle a little bit in his last fight against Austin Hubbard, especially when it came to the grappling and control side, I think that in this matchup, he's going to be better prepared. We have a bigger octagon here for UFC 316, so he's going to have more space to move around within this fight. And on top of that, his last fight against Austin Hubbard, which was a split decision, did happen at elevation. So he's going to have, some more advantages working for him in this fight against Choinski. On the feet, this fight shouldn't really be close. Mederos has really sound, really skilled striking, really good striking defense as well, so he's pretty sound defensively. He will get his on the feet, and I don't think it'll be close against Choinski when it comes to the stand-up. So if Choinski doesn't get the fight to the ground, which I think that even if he does, we'll see Mederos have enough of a get-up game to kind of get this fight back to the feet. Without enough control time, Choinski does not win this. All the damage is going to be done on the Mederos side as well, since he will be the better striker here. So I'm going to go with Mederos to win this one. I think that he's a slight favorite. The line does make sense only because stylistically this is the type of opponent that will, give Mederos problems. A better wrestler in the future will definitely give Mederos problems. He does have some stuff he has to clean up on that end, but I don't think Choinski's the one. He's 8-0, and we know how undefeated fighters are doing in 2025. I'm going to go with Mederos to win this one. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight up, we got Quillan Salkilld versus Yanal Ashmouz. And one thing you're probably going to see pretty common this week is that some of these fights have insanely wide lines. This one, I think, being the widest line that I disagree with this week, and that's Quillan Salkilld being almost a minus 500 favorite. I think that's pretty insane. Yanal Ashmouz, well, he is 8-1. He has one loss in the UFC. That loss is to Chris Duncan, and that loss has been aging beautifully for Yanal Ashmouz. Chris Duncan coming off that win over Jordan Vucenic, which people are really, really high on as well. Prior to that, he beat Balaji Oki, who just got a win very recently. So, Yanal Ashmouz, 8-1, one loss to a pretty skilled fighter. Quillan Salkilld also 8-1, coming off a very, hyped up victory. But that victory was to Anshul Jubli, where he did knock him out in 19 seconds. So he did exactly what he's supposed to do to a fighter of the caliber of Anshul Jubli. But at the end of the day, we can't really index too much on that. The stoppage is also, potentially slightly early. I think the ref could have, gave Anshul Jubli a little bit of a chance. Seemed like he was going for the legs right after he did get knocked down. But that is what it is. He knocks him out in 19 seconds. I wouldn't really index that way too much. But coming into this matchup, Quillan Salkilld, he's long, he's rangy, 6 feet tall, 75 inches of reach, and he's pretty good with it. He kind of likes to dance on the outside. Really, really crisp striker, and he is fairly well-rounded. We saw in that Gage Young fight, he did go for takedowns, and I think it's just like the well-roundedness of Quillan Salkilld that makes him such a hyped-up prospect. But Yanal Ashmouz on the other side is packs a ton of power. He throws some really, really strong overhands. And, if one of those connects on a Quillan Salkilld, which, Gage Young was catching him a little bit in that fight, I think that, Yanal Ashmouz does have the power to put a Quillan Salkilld out, A. And then B, in that last fight of Yanal Ashmouz versus Trevor Peek, we saw Yanal Ashmouz really, well-round his game plan out himself, went for a ton of offensive wrestling in that fight, got a ton of takedowns. Not crazy amount of control. Peek did stand up a couple times, but if Peek stood up, he rematted Peek, got him back to the ground. So that's something I would look for in this fight. I think that Yanal Ashmouz has shown in the Trevor Peek fight, the striking was kind of going iffy. I would say Trevor Peek was kind of outpointing him on the strikes, on the feet. Trevor Peek looked a little bit more calm, a little bit more collected in that fight versus the normal berserker that Trevor Peek is. And then Yanal Ashmouz had the fight IQ to kind of grind it out, push him up against the fence, grind out the decision win. He definitely did look good in that Trevor Peek fight. Now he's coming up against a Quillan Salkilld who had the 19-second knockout over Anshul Jubli. Okay, cool. And then prior to that, had a competitive fight against Gage Young on the Contender Series. And we have Salkilld at minus 500. I just think that's pretty insane. I'm going to have to go with Yanal Ashmouz. I think that at plus 340 or plus 370 almost, he's shown that, he can grind the fight out. He did that against Trevor Peek, and maybe Quillan Salkilld is just really, really good on the defensive side. We haven't seen it too much, but maybe Yanal Ashmouz tries to grind him up against the fence, but Salkilld is good enough to kind of break this fight into space really quick, does not wear down, and pieces Ashmouz up. Sure, I think that's possible, But with Yanal Ashmouz's power, the potential to kind of put Salkilld to sleep, and just him showing that he's willing to kind of grind a decision out, I'm going to have to lean towards him at plus 370 odds. There's just no way. Salkilld is just too green of a prospect, and we just don't know kind of what he's made up of just yet. So I'm not really one of the people that are extremely high on Salkilld. I think he is good. I think he is well-rounded. But a win like Yanal Ashmouz will really kind of put him in the area where I think that he could maybe be worth something of this price tag. But at the current moment, no chance. I'm going to go with Yanal Ashmouz. Probably to get this one done by decision. I think he just grinds Salkilld out. I think Salkilld, has a little bit of an awakening here. This isn't Anshul Jubilee. And let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card, we got Ju Sang-yu versus Jeka Saragih. And Ju Sang-yu, 8-0, making his UFC debut. He is also a minus 500 favorite, so a lot of big, chalky favorites on this card. Ju Sang-yu, though, I mean, he's going to be a little bit equipped to kind of win this matchup against Jeka Saragih. Ju Sang-yu's probably the better striker here. I like the way, he's very confident on the feet, likes to plot forward, and moves forward in a very, commanding manner where he does take control of the octagon. And Jeka Saragih, on the other hand, he's kind of got one thing going for him here, and that's really just big power, or maybe even some sort of fly submission. I think that Jeka Saragih might just be the better pure finisher out of the two of these. But Ju Sang-yu is gonna have the power to put Jeka Saragih away. He's gonna just be able to kind of do whatever he wants in this matchup. So I'm gonna go with Ju Sang-yu. Saragih has the power to put anyone away, but can't make a pick based on that. Kind of get the line here. Maybe 500 is a little bit too wide, but I get it. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card, we got the first women's MMA fight of the night. We got Ariane Lipski versus Cong Wang. And with Cong Wang, that Gabriela Fernandez fight will always leave a sour taste in my mouth. She was minus 800 going into that fight, minus 1,000 maybe. Gets choked out in the second round. Don't really want to talk about that one. But since then, comes out, beats a Bruno Brazil. And we know Cong Wang, super talented, really, really good striker. You're going to hear a lot that, she beat Valentina Shevchenko in a kickboxing fight back in 2015. So she's a very talented kickboxer, really good on the feet. And the good thing about this matchup for her is that Ariane Lipski is also just primarily a striker. Now, she's been in the UFC for a while, Ariane Lipski, and obviously being in the UFC for as long as she has, she's probably developed some sort of, well-roundedness in her game. But unless she comes out here and just goes all out, pure wrestling, pure grappling, just goes out here, try to control or submit Cong Wang, unless she does that, I think she's screwed. So I think Cong Wang goes in here. I actually think Cong Wang could probably find a finish on Ariane Lipski in this fight. It's going to be interesting to watch. So Ariane Lipski has been knocked out a couple times. I think Cong Wang definitely has what it takes to knock her out. But if Ariane Lipski comes out here and realizes that, hey, my only path to victory to beat this girl is just come here and all out, just grapple the entire time, and for some reason she's able to make that preparation, it's women's MMA, man. I wouldn't be surprised if she comes out here and just looks like a completely different fighter. I'm going to have to pick Cong Wang, though. Haven't seen it from Lipski yet when it comes to that side of her game. So Cong Wang is going to be the pick. I think it's fine, but like I said, she's way too chalky, and after Gabriela Fernandez, not laying chalk, minus 500 on Cong Wang. Just, if it happened to me again, that would hurt way too bad. So I'm not going to do that. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next on the card, we got Khaos Williams versus Andreas Gustafsson. This is probably going to end in a knockout. We got Khaos Williams, 15-4, never been knocked out in his career. We got Andreas Gustafsson, 11-2, also never been knocked out in his career. And Gustafsson, making his UFC debut here after an impressive performance on the Contender Series. Khaos Williams coming off that loss to Gabriel Bonfim, but Bonfim, obviously, very highly touted prospect in the UFC. So I'm going to go with Khaos Williams here. He's a moderate favorite in this matchup against Andreas Gustafsson. There's a couple things going against Gustafsson. On the non-fighting side, obviously, Gustafsson was booked to fight last week. I think he made somewhat of a weight cut, even though that fight last week was at a catch weight. He made somewhat of a weight cut, and then, that fight gets canceled. Now he has to kind of go to New Jersey and fight again this week against Khaos Williams. So interesting kind of dynamic there at cut weight again. But if we just ignore that and think that, Gustafsson's good to go, from a fighting perspective, I'm still going to go with Khaos Williams here. Gustafsson, in his Contender Series fight you saw, he's very aggressive, always moving forward, wants to really rough you up, grab you, rough you up, push you up against the fence, throws some really nasty strikes in the clinch. Most, exciting clincher in the UFC, Andreas Gustafsson. And then Khaos Williams, we know who Khaos Williams is. He's going to throw big looping shots, pack, a real punch. Those overhands can kind of put anyone to sleep. So Khaos Williams is going to be that fighter. And the thing that kind of makes me lean Khaos Williams here is his fight against Gabriel Bonfim, where Bonfim took him to the ground a couple times and he was able to reverse position. He was able to get back to his feet. He didn't look super lost on the ground against a Gabriel Bonfim, who is really, really good on the ground. So that's kind of what's making me lean Khaos Williams here, because Gustafsson, while he won't shoot just like pure takedowns, I think that while he will try to obviously get into the clinch, get into his game, his entries and exits aren't the cleanest. And if he does get the fight to the ground, I actually lean Khaos Williams. So I think that Gustafsson's really going to have to keep that clinch going long enough and not get caught by a Khaos Williams to win this fight, which I think is pretty dangerous for him, especially if you watch his fight on the Contender Series. When he's especially exiting the clinch, he kind of gets hit up a little bit, and with someone like Khaos Williams exiting the clinch and, just leaving your neck or chin kind of up in the air, Williams is definitely going to capitalize on that. He's going to throw some big shots coming your way, and I think that's kind of how Gustafsson gets knocked out, really just exiting the clinch. I also think that, maybe there's a small thing here, but I feel like Khaos Williams, bro, in the clinch, jump the ghillie. I think he could get it on Andreas Gustafsson. Maybe I'm just kind of shooting for the stars there, but I'm going to go with Khaos Williams here. Andreas Gustafsson, though, he is a marauder. He is tough. And he can be pretty berserk out there. So we're going to kind of see. The jury is still out on him. If he can beat someone like Khaos Williams, then Gustafsson's going to be, pretty dangerous fighter in the UFC. So we'll see what's up. But as of now, I'm going to have to go with Khaos Williams. I think he has more paths to victory. And, I really see him kind of knocking Gustafsson out here. So Williams going to be the pick. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Serghei Spivac versus Waldo Cortez-Acosta. And I'm a little bit going to fence it on this fight. I'm not going to lie. But my pick, I'm going to lock in. My pick is going to be Waldo Cortez-Acosta to beat Serghei Spivac. Now, I really like Waldo Cortez-Acosta. He's a real good boxer. And on the feet in this matchup, he's going to have Spivac's number. He's going to be able to piece Spivac up. And to be honest, in a 3-round striking match, he knocks Spivac out, maybe in the first, maybe in the second. But definitely before the third round, he knocks out of Serghei Spivac. And people say Waldo Cortez-Acosta doesn't have enough power. But to be honest, he has a pretty powerful straight and super clean, super accurate boxing. He can definitely get a Serghei Spivac, who is a bit chinny, out of there in this fight for sure when it comes to the striking. Now, when it comes to the ground, that's kind of where obviously Waldo Cortez-Acosta might have some problems. There's a couple things here though. I think his takedown defense could potentially hold up against a Serghei Spivac, but nonetheless, I see that over 3 rounds, Spivac probably does get a couple takedowns on Waldo Cortez-Acosta. Waldo Cortez-Acosta will show you guys that he has a good get-up game. Now, if his get-up game kind of gets him in trouble, he gives up his back building a base and he gets choked out by Spivac, I won't be surprised. I think that if you're betting on Serghei Spivac this week, all the equity is on Spivac by submission. I think there's a good chance that Spivac gets Waldo to the ground, Waldo gives up his back, and Spivac, boom, locks in the sub, gets him out of there. Or, Cortez-Acosta could potentially, keep this fight standing, just piece Spivac up. And maybe Waldo Cortez-Acosta can also just, get taken out a couple times, but get back to his feet, stay safe while getting back up, and then beat Serghei Spivac by knockout or decision. So that's why I'm going to lean Waldo Cortez-Acosta. He has more paths to victory here. I don't see Spivac out-decisioning Waldo, only because Spivac does not have good control on the ground. If he gets Cortez-Acosta to the ground, Cortez-Acosta will stand back up. Spivac also cannot beat Waldo Cortez-Acosta in a striking match to a decision for sure. Spivac probably doesn't knock Waldo out. Waldo's super tough, and Waldo can knock Spivac out as well. The only way Spivac maybe gets a knockout is through like ground and pound. I just don't see that happening. But Spivac can get a submission. That threat is real in this matchup for Waldo Cortez-Acosta. So I'm gonna say that Waldo's gonna be my pick. I think he has more paths to victory with via knockout, via decision, and I think those are a little bit more likely. But Serghei Spivac by submission sitting at plus 450. If you want to play that as a hedge and you want to bet Waldo and then hedge it with Spivac by submission, I'm very confident that that's going to be a profitable outlook of 2 bets there. Either Waldo wins and you get paid out, or he gives up his back and Spivac locks in that submission. But I really don't see Spivac winning a decision or winning by knockout. And yeah, I'm going to pick Waldo because of the more paths. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card, we got Azamat Murzakanov versus Brendson Ribeiro, and I'm going to go with Azamat Murzakanov in this fight. He's 14-0, looking like one of the better undefeated fighters on the roster right now. Really good, especially for a light heavyweight. He definitely moves more like a welterweight, so good on his feet, super quick, and super light on his feet as well. So that's why I really like Azamat Murzakanov here. To be honest, I think he knocks out Brendson Ribeiro pretty quickly in this matchup. The odds also reflect that. Brendson Ribeiro, he's got 2 wins in a row right now, and the Nurgazai win was pretty good, but Kyle Machado by split decision. Kyle Machado had, no wins in the UFC, got bumped after, winning Contender Series and then going 0-3 in the UFC, losing to the likes of Mick Parkin, who, Mick Parkin's not bad. Dontel Mays, who's pretty bad. And then he comes down to light heavyweight. So he's actually a traditional heavyweight, comes down to light heavyweight, fights Brendson Ribeiro, where Ribeiro, squeaks out a split decision against him. I thought Ribeiro could have done better in that matchup. I had Ribeiro. He was plus money in that fight too. I picked him. He did get the job done, but split decision win. Should have done better there. Beats Serghei, pretty good win. But, I just don't think that he has what it takes to beat an Azamat Murzakanov here. Murzakanov, really good. Definitely going to be one of the fighters that's kind of feared in this division. I think he kind of just dances on Brendson Ribeiro this weekend. This one shouldn't really be close. The odds reflect that. Fully understand it. Now, this being a minus 500 makes sense, especially compared to the other minus 500s on the card. You have Jusang Yu and Quillan Salkilld, where I think that's a bit insane. But here, I get the odds a lot better here. And yeah, Murzakanov is going to be the pick. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight up, we got Bruno Silva versus Joshua Van. And once again, another minus 500 that I think is a little bit interesting. I'm a big Joshua Van fan, so I'm not going to hate on him for being minus 500, but I lied. I'm going to hate on him a little bit for being minus 500 because, he's coming off a win to Cody Durden and Ray Saruya. And those wins, pretty good wins. Ray Saruya undefeated, obviously, but unranked. And, has a long way to go in the UFC, especially. Cody Durden prior to that, that's a good win, but Cody Durden, primarily a wrestler. Before that, Edgar Shirez, which was, I think, a pretty close fight, actually. And then prior to that, he had a loss to Charles Johnson, where I think he was winning the fight, but I checked the scorecards. It was, 1-1 going into the third round on all judges' cards against Charles Johnson. So that fight was a toss-up. In my opinion, he should have been up 2-0 and, just had to survive that third round to get the win, but that wasn't the case. Charles Johnson knocks him out in the third round, and that's just kind of something that I want to focus on for this matchup against Bruno Silva, just because Bruno Silva is the first fighter he's fighting in a while that's going to be real comfortable on the feet, like a Charles Johnson. And prior to that, with the Cody Durdens, the Ray Surias, these fighters kind of want to get Joshua Van to the ground. And Joshua Van, he is a little bit small, even for flyweight, but good takedown defense, and it's hard to hold Joshua Van down for a while. We saw Cody Durden do it for an entire round, but then just absolutely gassed out and just can't, just was unable to maintain that pace. And it took a lot to kind of keep him down in the first round. And then we see a Ray Saruya who, just struggled the entire time wrestling Joshua Van. So now we have a Bruno Silva who's not necessarily going to want to wrestle Joshua Van. And the last time we saw this was up against Charles Johnson, who had enough punch to kind of knock a Joshua Van out. So will that chin hold up? I think that's something interesting, just because Bruno Silva can hit hard, man, for sure. Bruno Silva has a bunch of knockouts. He can definitely get this fight done by knockout, and he's going to be a step up in competition at the same time. So interesting to see Joshua Van as such a big favorite. I'll still pick Joshua Van only because, it's a flyweight fight. You're going to want to obviously index for a decision more than a knockout for flyweight fights in general. You just got to play the odds there. And when you talk about decisions, Joshua Van is probably going to be one of the better decision fighters you're going to see on the roster, just because he throws such a high volume. As you see, he's going to land over 8 significant strikes a minute. The amount of volume he throws with how clean his boxing is, Van's a real good fighter, and then Van's also well-rounded. If the fight does go to the ground, he doesn't like to just kind of wrestle and control, but he can kind of hold his own on the ground, and you've seen that in the fight with Ray Saruya and Cody Durden, where, not necessarily the fight going to the ground, but Ray Saruya struggling to take Joshua Van down. So Van, super well-rounded. And when it comes to winning decisions, he has all the tools to kind of get fights done by decision. Bruno Silva, on the other hand, he's just a big step up in competition, man, and has what it takes to knock a Joshua Van out, which is kind of what's going to be the struggle for Van in his career in general. At least that's what it looks like so far. So I'm going to go with Van, but I think he's a better fighter. Minus 500, I think, is a little bit heavy for him for sure, especially for this fight. I don't think Bruno Silva will knock him out, but I think that's obviously a possibility. And with the step up in comp, I just think it's a little bit disrespectful to have, Joshua Van at minus 550. So that's just my opinion. I think the line's wide. But outside of that, Van is a better fighter. He should get this one done. I think he gets it done by decision too. And yeah, let's move on to the next matchup. To kick off the main card, we got Vicente Luque versus Kevin Holland. And Kevin Holland is a bum. I'm taking Vicente Luque to win this matchup. I'm going to tell you exactly why I'm taking Vicente Luque. And Kevin Holland, I've had a real good read on this guy. We sniped his last 6 fights correctly. He's 2-4 in his last 6. We've picked the spots where he wins. We've picked all the spots where he loses. And this is a spot where he loses. Here's why. So we faded him against JDM, faded him against Michael Page, took him against Oleksichuk, faded him against Roman, faded him against RDR, and then we took him against Gunnar Nelson. We've just seen that, this guy does not really care. And, the speed at which he books fights is good, because one thing that's really hard when it comes to UFC betting is the fact that it's really hard to tell, like, what is the efficacy of, the fighter's camp. We can only look at what the fighter has kind of looked like in his last couple fights, but we can't really tell how much the fighter is getting better. Maybe some of us have some connections when it comes to the space and can, see what's up in the camp, see how they're doing in sparring and shit like that. But just in general, from like the regular public, we can't really tell how good a fighter is getting in camp, how much improvement he's going to make. But with someone like Kevin Holland, man, you don't need to worry about that, because right after he loses the fight, he books the next one, and probably not going to improve much or, grow much as a fighter. He's going to be the same fighter he is, cashing paychecks. And I like it because it makes my life easier for sure. And in this fight against Vicente Luque, I think Luque, still enters fights looking to get them done. I think Kevin Holland just kind of enters fights and says, fuck it. Now, Holland does have power. He's going to be rangy, and, Luque has taken a fuck ton of damage throughout his career. So if Kevin Holland knocks, Vicente Luque out, so be it. I think that's his only path to victory here, to be completely honest. I don't see Kevin Holland, jab moving, outpointing Vicente Luque. I think that Luque on the feet is, aggressive enough, and even though he has taken damage, he does not give a fuck. He'll still fight. He had a close round striking against a Joaquin Buckley, and Joaquin Buckley brings in more power than Kevin Holland, that's for sure. He had a close round against Joaquin Buckley. 2 judges gave it to Buckley. 1 judge actually gave Luque round 1 to Buckley in that fight. So interesting enough, I think Buckley did win that first round, but Luque, 1 judge gives him the round against Joaquin Buckley. And at the end of that round, there's a sequence at the end of that first round where, he ties Buckley's legs up pretty well, gets in on the hips, and, takes a Joaquin Buckley down. And this is a focused, locked in Joaquin Buckley, gets him to the ground. Then the round ends. After that, chokes out Themba Gorimbo pretty quickly in the first round. And you're going to see him come up against Kevin Holland. And one thing is going to be certain, Kevin Holland's going to be live for that knockout on the feet, but there's a chance that he doesn't get it. Vicente Luque keeps this fight pretty close, pretty competitive on the feet. And then there's also, Vicente Luque is just going to take this guy down, bro. Like, everyone takes this guy down, and Vicente Luque is also just going to take him down. He has what it takes to take down Kevin Holland. He's going to go in and do it. And to be honest, if he takes Kevin Holland down, both these guys have pretty good submissions, but I think Luque, with the front choke, with the darts, with the anaconda, something like that, bro, he's going to get this one done. And this fight's probably going under either way. If Holland wins, it's knockout or sub. If Luque wins, it's probably a sub realistically, but he could grind a decision here too. So, bro, I'm just going to go with Vicente Luque here, man. I think he has more paths to victory. He's just going to take him down and do what he does on the ground with the Kevin Holland. I don't think that Kevin Holland's just going to come in here and just look completely different. He's going to be the same fighter he always is. Vicente Luque, I think he's going to be a bit more locked in. He's going to, play for the win more than Kevin Holland. And I think that, Luque, while he can be aggressive, unless he has a lapse in fight IQ, which is possible, but I'm not going to kind of, index for that as much. I think Luque should be able to get this done. He has the tools. I'm going to pick Vicente Luque plus, 200. And I'm taking that, to be completely honest. Minus 200 on Kevin Holland is absolutely fucking insane. So Luque is going to be the pick. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Mario Batista versus Patchy Mix. And Mario Batista, public enemy number 1 in the UFC right now. Everyone wants to see him lose. And, Patchy Mix, look, I could be really wrong here. I'm going to slightly lean Mario Batista, not betting this fight at all. Patchy Mix, I want to see, how he fares up against UFC level comp here. And I know you're going to say, he's been fighting similar, UFC level comp in Bellator prior to this. So I'm a bit stupid for saying that, sure. But, Mario Batista, man, he hasn't lost in a while. He's been looking good. And, he's really a problem. I think Jose Aldo did beat him. I'm not going to lie, in that split decision. But Jose Aldo, even in his last fight, Jose Aldo looked great. He was absolutely destroying Amin Zahabi until, he did get tired. He did gas out. So skill for skill, Jose Aldo is still Jose fucking Aldo. And, Mario Batista definitely did look pretty good out there against Jose Aldo. I mean, he got the fucking win. So that's one thing to note. And then Apache Mix coming in here. I think that Batista on the feet, he's just grimy, bro. He's gritty on the feet. And while Batista is public, enemy number 1 against Jose Aldo, go watch that Ricky Simone fight. And that was a banger of a fight he put up against Ricky Simone prior to that. So Mario Batista definitely can be gritty, especially on the feet. He'll throw an insane amount of volume. I think he beats Patchy Mix on the feet, especially in that scenario. Patchy Mix, super live here for a sub, though. I'm not going to lie. The one thing is, if Patchy Mix gets a takedown on Batista will show you the urgency to get back up. But within that urgency to get back up, he does leave his back and neck exposed, which is all Patchy Mix needs to kind of get a submission up in here. So I'm going to slightly lean towards Mario Batista, only because I think that I kind of just don't like, there's a Ramiz Brahimaj's of the world that, beat Billy Goff last weekend. And so be it. Could look dumb picking Billy Goff, but there's the patchy mix in this scenario. There's a Serghei Spivac that we broke down earlier on in the card. I can't pick fighters that are like submission or bust, to be completely honest. And I'm not saying patchy mix is submission or bust, but I think in this fight, Mario Bautista just kind of edges him out in most cases, except for I think the fact that there is a real threat that patchy mix finds that submission, but I normally kind of play towards the decision much more. I think Bautista is better equipped to win a decision against patchy mix, so I'm going to lean him ever so slightly here. Ever so slightly. I know I'm fence-sitting a little bit, but ever so slightly I'm going to lean Mario Bautista. I'm not going to bet this fight. That's just going to be the way it is. If patchy mix goes out there and finds a sub, I wouldn't be surprised. Let's move on to the next matchup. All right, next fight on the card, we got Kelvin Gastelum versus Joe Pyfer, and pretty straightforward prediction here, man. Kelvin Gastelum, not the most locked-in fighter. We know Kelvin Gastelum, super talented, but just not putting everything together in his career, and we kind of know where he stands as a fighter. Joe Pyfer, on the other hand, 13-3, looks really good. Has that loss to Jack Hermansson, but Jack Hermansson, he's a real deal. Jack Hermansson's super skilled, super talented, super tough. He's probably going to come out here, and I think he's going to piece Kelvin Gastelum up, man. I think, Joe Pyfer, big, strong, good everywhere the fight goes. I think the one thing about Joe Pyfer here is that, maybe if the fight extends, but I like Pyfer, man. I think the odds make sense here. I think he's going to piece Kelvin Gastelum up, and we know Joe Pyfer has that big power, and I think he's going to be the first fighter to knock Kelvin Gastelum out, to be honest. Kelvin Gastelum never been knocked out. I think Joe Pyfer comes here, puts an absolute beating on him, and it's not going to be a one-punch, go to sleep type of knockout, but it will be a volume, just absolute brutal beating on Kelvin Gastelum that eventually the ref kind of comes in there and stops it. Standing TKO type vibes for Joe Pyfer here. So I'm going to go with Pyfer. I think he's just better. I think he puts an absolute beating on Kelvin Gastelum. I understand the betting line here. Let's move on to the next matchup. In the co-main event, we got Juliana Pena versus Kayla Harrison. Kayla Harrison, came into the UFC super hyped up. Everyone kind of thought she was going to be a future title challenger, if not a future champion, and that's kind of where she stands today. She's coming off that win over Ketlen Vieira, who we saw have a pretty good win against Macy Chiasson last week, and Vieira kind of just out-wrestled Chiasson a lot, and she wasn't able to do that to Kayla Harrison. We know who Kayla Harrison is in the wrestling world, Olympic gold medalist and all that, so Kayla Harrison, we kind of know where she stands. Juliana Pena, man, it amazes me that Juliana Pena has a goddamn UFC World Championship in 2025. We know, Juliana Pena, she lost that fight to Raquel Pennington. She came off that split decision win, becoming the champ. I think she definitely lost that fight to Raquel Pennington. Prior to that, she loses to Amanda Nunes, who just beat her up after, she did come out here, have that huge upset win over Amanda Nunes prior to that in 2021. After that, in 2022, Amanda Nunes comes back, serious about the fight, just beats up Juliana Pena. And Pena is pretty ass in general. She's not a good fighter. Raquel Pennington beat her. Kayla Harrison going to come out here and should be able to beat her. Skill for skill is not really a conversation. The only thing about Kayla Harrison, man, is that Kayla Harrison has never really gone 5 rounds at this weight. You're going to see people say, oh, Kayla Harrison's fought 5 rounds before, blah, 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 blah. That was at lightweight at 155 pounds. Kayla Harrison's an absolute unit of a woman, and at 135 pounds, man, if she can make the weight, another thing you'll probably hear is that she's never actually made championship weight here. You normally get a 1 pound leeway, and Harrison normally just kind of killed herself to get to 136. In this scenario, she's going to have to get to 135, and we're going to see how deadly of that extra pound weight cut is actually going to be for Kayla Harrison this weekend. So that's something to keep in consideration. These are kind of the only things you can break down for this fight, because in general, in just like a skill for skill as a fighter, Kayla Harrison, and to be honest, a lot of fighters in the women's division should actually just beat up on a Juliana Pena. Juliana Pena is not good. But outside of that, she's just a dog. She's gritty, and in this division, that's kind of all it takes to clearly get to the top. So Juliana Pena, she's got one real path to victory here, and that's to wear Kayla Harrison out. Let Kayla Harrison kind of blow the load first couple rounds, first 1-2 round, and then as she starts slowing down, just put a pace on her, squeak out that 3rd round, and then just start dominating in the rounds 4 and 5. If that's a reality, I guess Juliana Pena can maybe make that happen, but as a fighter, Kayla Harrison's much better. If she doesn't gas out, if she can make a proper weight cut to 135, she knows she has to go 5 rounds right after that. If she doesn't gas out, there's no way, she can't even 50-45 with Juliana Pena. So gas tank's going to be the only concern, but Kayla Harrison has to be the pick. You can't really pick against this unless, anyone picking Juliana Pena is picking her on the merit that, Harrison's going to gas and Pena's going to start taking over. But skill for skill, it's not even a real competition. So Kayla Harrison's going to be the pick. Let's move on to the next matchup. In the main event, we got Merab Dvalishvili versus Sean O'Malley. This is the rematch, and I'm seeing pretty interesting narrative around Sean O'Malley leading up to this fight. I think that for Sean O'Malley specifically, I think the narrative is really important. I think he's someone that really feeds off of that energy. Sean O'Malley prior to this, superstar, always saying, he's undefeated. He did have that one loss, but he got injured in that fight. It was, an interesting scenario. So always thought, he's undefeated, best fighter in the world. No one can beat him. And I think that narrative really helped him in his own head that he is this big superstar. And he was kind of feeding off of that energy. And then after the loss to Merab, he kind of had to switch it up. And I think this humble, back in the fire, figuring it out, coming back with something to prove is the new narrative that he's kind of latched onto. He's kind of built saying, he's quit weed. He's done a bunch of different things, and he's just sounding and looking a lot different going into this fight. I think that's something that really helps Sean O'Malley himself, that he's someone that really feeds off of the energy of a very strong narrative and storyline. Merab, on the other hand, we kind of know what Merab's going to do here. I'm going to go ahead and pick Merab to win in this fight against Sean O'Malley. One thing I will say, though, is that this is the first time we're seeing Merab rematch anyone, which I think is very interesting because Merab, while he is very dominant, he is a one-dimensional fighter. I don't think that's a crazy take to say. Merab is going to do the same thing every time. His game plan is very similar every single time, and why change it? Clearly, nobody in the UFC has been able to stop his, pace, pressure type of game plan, and Sean O'Malley is going to be the first fighter who's kind of seen that, felt the rhythm and timing, felt the presence of Merab, felt the pressure, the pace of Merab, and, gone back to the drawing board and able to make adjustments based off of what he knows is coming back his way. That's an interesting thing, interesting component I don't hear many people talking about, but I think that's really something to look out for. I think that's going to be something that, Merab has always just been able to do what he does and no one can stop it. Sean's going to be the first one to kind of just be able to make adjustments and come back with a new game plan. That's going to be definitely something that to look out for here. The one thing I'll tell you for sure is that a Merab fight will always be super close. Even the fight against Umar was close. The fight against Sean was close. Not much finishing potential on the Merab side, and just the way he runs the rounds, because he does lack a little bit of the damage factor on himself. So just makes swing rounds really easy to create because he's going to have a ton of control. Someone's going to land something big on him, and then from there it's the round is up in the air. Are the judges going to lean towards the big shot that was landed, or are the judges going to lean towards all the control time that Merab racked up? So that's just kind of why I see that this fight being super close. I'm going to have to lean Merab. Every time that I've doubted Merab, he's proven me wrong. I feel like an idiot, not learning from my mistakes if I don't. Like I said, there's a couple things that are going in Sean's favor. The rematch thing, I think, is the biggest one here. As a fight, what these guys are, it's not really something that I really need to break down. We know what Merab's going to do. We know what Sean wants to do in this fight. So we're just going to see if they kind of have the, Sean's going to have the ability to go in and do that, because we know Merab can come out here and put a pace and, put that pressure on Sean O'Malley. Can Sean make the adjustments to, stay on the feet, stay in range, and piece up a Merab? We're about to find out. I think the rematch factor is pretty big here. I think minus 300 is a little bit chalky for Merab. Like I said, I think either way the fight is close. There is definitely a bet to make on this fight. There's one bet I'm hammering on this fight that I think is super, super easy money. So check out betkopicks.com for $20 a month. You can access our bets. And, we've been doing pretty well on the premium side. Like you've seen our picks have been doing really well as well. So check out betkopicks.com if you want to check out the one bet I'm actually hammering on this fight, because there's one thing I think that is almost certain to happen in this matchup. So I'm going to lean Merab, and that's going to be the picks and predictions for UFC 316. Thank you guys for tuning in. Really appreciate it. I will see you guys next week.